Hey, people. I found this video earlier today from PragerU, Capitalism or Socialism, which one is more democratic, starring our favorite man, Dinesh D'Souza, where it's basically just 5 minutes of them misinterpreting basic economics. So I kind of wanted to go over this and lay out my counter arguments. I can't just let this stand by itself because it's just there are some real brain dead takes in here. I'm going to be addressing this sort of as objectively as I can. I'm not going to dump on PragerU as much as I kind of want to. I'm just going to try and, I don't want to say dissect because that's kind of a loaded word, but analyze his arguments from a rational perspective. Let's go.
Why is socialism so popular? Less than 10 years ago, you couldn't refer to socialism in a positive way and hope to have a career in American politics.
So this is because of the Red Scare. The Red Scare kind of had some very long-lasting effects. You couldn't talk about certain things for a very long period of time, and most people agree that it was overblown. Like there wasn't really this much of a reason to be scared of certain economic things that were really demonized during a Red Scare, and we need to take a closer look at some of these things. The Red Scare, not good. Hot take, I know.
Socialism was referred to as the S word. Now it is affirmed either explicitly or implicitly by just about everyone on the left. And amazingly, given socialism's record of failure, the socialists seem to be gaining ground.
This is hilarious. Socialism gets an F. In what? I don't know. But, it's worth noting what he's saying here is that socialism hasn't been tried and worked. And what he's talking about during this video is democratic socialism, which A, isn't socialism, and B, isn't state communism, which is what most people are talking about when they say socialism doesn't work. They're talking about things like Russia and China, which were state communism. Socialism is a different thing. And democratic socialism is a very different thing that's basically based on stuff that's worked in Europe. So that's the reason why it's gaining popularity. It's because it's not really, it didn't get an F, Not like he's saying.
Why? What makes socialism so attractive to so many? Socialism, according to its proponents, is more democratic and therefore more moral than capitalism. Leftist filmmaker Michael Moore explains it for us. Democratic socialism means everyone has a seat at the table and everybody gets a slice of the pie. The famed socialist writer Irving Howe wrote something similar in his 1982 autobiography. We believe that the democracy in our political life should also be extended deeply into economic life. The basic idea here is that socialism is vindicated through its roots in popular consent.
I actually don't have a problem with this characterization. Basically, I want to expand on this a little bit by saying that the idea here is that we have democracy in government. That's pretty cool. Democracy seems to be really nice. People seem to like it a lot more than the alternatives. Why don't we have it in other places? Why don't I have control over what corporations do? I work in a corporation. Why don't I have some sort of investment in that company? Why can't I have some level of control? Not complete control, mind you, but some level of control over my work environment. Why can I be fired for absolutely no reason? Bringing this sort of idea of democracy to other places in our life.
If a majority of people working through their elected representatives declares something to be a public entitlement, say free college or free health care, then they are justified in extracting resources from those who create wealth to pay for it.
So I have a problem with this characterization. He says extracting wealth from those who create it, right? The problem that I have with this is that he's implying that, basically CEOs, which is who we would be taxing. We're not taxing middle-level managers. The taxation plans proposed by democratic socialists generally target the uber wealthy. So we're talking tens to hundreds of millions of income per year. This isn't middle manager territory. This is if you're a giant corporation, your CEO might make this territory. So when he says these are the people who are creating the wealth, I kind of have to doubt how much wealth CEOs are creating. It's really what they're administrating over, right? The wealth creation happens at the worker level. The people who are creating these wealth are, the 50,000, 100,000 employees in that corporation. But For some reason, we've created this mythos that says, well, Apple is making billions of dollars a year. That's all Steve Jobs. Nothing to do with the engineers under him. And it's true that he has a pretty disproportionate role in that creation of the wealth. And it's, possibly true that he should be compensated disproportionately. Steve Jobs in particular is an example of somebody who had some really good ideas, and without him, the corporation might not have made anywhere near the amount of money it did. But once you get past maybe, say $1 billion, some arbitrary, very high threshold, I would argue you can't really work hard enough to deserve that. Steve Jobs didn't work significantly more than the engineers at his company. And his work, while being slightly more valuable, arguably, both are necessary to create the products that Apple produced. He couldn't have done it without the engineers, and you could argue the engineers couldn't have done it without him. It's a symbiotic relationship. But the way we structure it is to give all of the credit to one person. So when he says that we're extracting wealth from those who create it, that's not really what we're doing. We're extracting wealth from those who we see as disproportionately compensated. You can remove the ability to make $1 billion without really affecting the incentive involved in creating a business that responds to customer needs. Say I'm a small business owner. I want to expand. I've got some really good ideas. Not being able to make $1 billion isn't going to stop me, as long as I can still make, 500 million, right? There's no real practical difference between the incentives offered between these two vast and incomprehensible amounts of money. We just want to set an arbitrary threshold so that we can compensate the people on the bottom more than they currently are, because we see the compensation received by different levels of business as disproportionate.
As Nathan Robinson argues in his book, Why You Should Be a Socialist, the moral imperative is to place the economy under the control of the people. Sounds good, at least superficially, until you dig a bit below the surface. First, what direct control do the people really have over any government institution?
So I'll cut to the chase here. What direct control do the people really have over any government institution? Some indirect control. Our representatives are the ones that appoint the people that head these institutions. But I don't really want direct control. If something like the post office is instituting a new retirement policy, do we really want everyone to vote on that? Nobody knows anything about, retirement economics. I want experts doing that. And those experts can be chosen by somebody that I elect. And if they choose bad representatives, we can replace them. That's sort of the idea behind representative democracy. Some issues don't really work best when everybody votes on them, but when we vote on them indirectly by putting experts into positions. So
what
none,
control
but who cares?
do the British people have over the National Health Service? What control do Americans have over the Department of Motor Vehicles or the U.S. Post Office?
So again, no direct control over these institutions. But we do have indirect control. And that's why these agencies work so well. I mean, he picked very strange examples. British people love the NHS. It's amazing healthcare from what I've heard. People love the post office. It's probably the most effective U.S. Nationalized agency. The DMV is not great, but that's honestly mostly an issue of funding. And it still works. It does its job. So it's very strange, the examples he picked.
The answer, of course, is none. Given its practical impossibility, genuine popular control over government institutions is a mirage.
So again, I think we have exactly as much direct control over these institutions as we want to, right? We could have more, but it would be very strange to put certain issues on the presidential ballot. People don't really want to vote for these things, and people aren't really experts on these things. So we would rather just appoint representatives to take care of it, and that seems to work generally fairly well.
Second, what if 51% of Americans vote to confiscate the resources of a single person, say Bill Gates? Does that make it right?
So what he's arguing against here is democracy. That's legal. We could do that now. That's not really a socialism thing. I really don't get why he's making this argument.
Under an authoritarian socialist government, a single dictator seizes the fruits of your labor.
I don't know why he's talking about authoritarian socialism here. what he's been talking about the whole video is democratic socialism, and these are very, very different things. Again, democratic socialism is basically just like European capitalism. These are just it's two completely different sets of ideas. I don't know why I do know why he's bringing this up. He wants to scare you because authoritarian socialism is very spooky. But it's unrelated.
Everyone is against that. Under democratic socialism, a majority does. The end result is the same. You've been robbed.
So the example he just brought up was, people voting, like hundreds of millions, it would have to be 150 million people voting to tax one person, Bill Gates. You haven't been robbed unless you're Bill Gates, right? We generally agree that the point of a democracy is to represent everybody within it, not the interests of billionaires. And the class interests of workers are very different from the class interests of billionaires. Dinesh D'Souza here is talking to the billionaires because those are the people that pay his paycheck. You haven't been robbed. They haven't touched your money. Democratic socialism taxation policies actually lower taxes on the working class. They raise taxes on people making tens of millions of dollars per year and up. And if you're making that much money, you probably live pretty nice anyway.
The fundamental problem with democratic socialism, however, is its assumption that in a free market system, the economy is not under the control of the people. This is exactly the opposite of how things work.
I'm going to let him explain his argument here before I kind of interject.
Let me explain. Each of us are not only citizens, we are also consumers. These are overlapping categories. Every citizen is a consumer, and every consumer is also a citizen. The consumer, like the citizen, is a voter. As citizens, we vote once every 2 or 4 years. As consumers, we vote many times a day.
So this is predicated on basic, economics, right? So the idea is that the free market allows for competition that will produce solutions that best fit the people. The problem is, in economic theory at least, not necessarily in the real world, but in economic theory, this is predicated on the assumption that you have an infinite amount of competition. In the real world, it basically this translates to if you have a ton of competition, it's going to produce good results. This works actually pretty well at the level of small businesses. Like, if you get to family-owned businesses in cities, these tend to have to reflect the interests of the people pretty well. Like if you open a new ice cream place where there's 4 others, it's not going to do very well, right? You have to cater to the interests of people. But once you get to a certain level, you're too big to fail. If you're at the level of Comcast, for instance, you are able to create legislation in cities that prevent other people from entering the market. This, sort of invalidates this basic economic principle of competition. So once you get to a certain size, you are able to restrict competition and invalidate the ability for people to vote with their wallets, right? Because their only option might be Comcast. They're not making a choice. They're just engaging in the only one that they have. This requires basically small businesses. And the way that we can fix this is have the other form of democracy that we like, representative democracy, to keep corporations in check once they get to this size. Government exists in the corporate sphere to prevent non-competitive practices and ensure that economic democracy is maintained. In practice, they don't do a great job of this, but I would argue this is mostly due to money in politics. Politics is another way that once you get to a certain size, you can institute non-competitive practices, and removing economic incentives from politicians would prevent this.
The citizen votes with a ballot, which costs him nothing except the inconvenience of going to the polls. The consumer votes with his money, which costs him a lot, all the time and effort he put in to earn that money. Only a fraction of citizens are eligible to vote at the ballot box, but every consumer votes in the marketplace, even felons, even children.
I want to note that something that socialists are also for, you can be for more than one thing at a time. Something that socialists are also for is increasing voter participation. We want to add felons, once they've served their time, back to voting. Some people say when they're in jail, they should be able to vote. They're citizens. And also a path for citizenship for illegal immigrants so that they, once they, are paying taxes properly, can vote. We're founded on, no taxation without representation, and yet we have people in this country who are being taxed but aren't being represented. Socialists say that's some bullshit. Let's get these people some representation.
Illegal aliens cannot vote for political candidates, but they too vote with their money. Moreover, citizens participate in a system of representative democracy. Their views are filtered through the politicians who represent them. Consumers, by contrast, vote in a system of direct democracy.
So again, I want to reiterate here that representative democracy we do for a reason. Certain issues, if we put them on the ballot, it wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense. Technical stuff that requires expertise. Representative democracy actually seems to work fairly well. And again, this direct democracy of economics does work, and it works at a small scale really well. The problem is we need to, have the government around to ensure that it works well at a larger scale, because once corporations get to a certain level of wealth and size, they just have so much influence, they can basically force people to buy their products. That's what marketing is. That's what lobbying is. These practices are anti-competitive. We need a government to keep them in check.
If you prefer an Audi to a Lexus or the Apple iPhone to the Samsung Galaxy.
It's very strange the choices he's picking here. He could pick like food or something that you actually have a lot of options. But for instance, a smartphone market is actually not very competitive. Say I, as a consumer, really want a removable battery. This is something that people in the tech sphere where I work have been wanting for like years. There's no real reason not to have one. Removable battery, expandable memory, these things are very easy to add to a phone. The problem is, it's not very profitable for the companies to include these things. When your battery runs out, they want you buying a new phone, right? When your battery is crap, they don't want you replacing it. They want you buying a new phone because that makes them more money. So all of the top smartphone companies right now do not offer a removable battery. This is not somewhere where I can vote with my wallet to get removable batteries. So the examples that he's picking here are actually not great examples of economic democracy. It's very strange.
You don't have to elect some other guy to exercise these preferences. You do it directly yourself by paying for them. Here we see the secret of how those billionaires like Jeff Bezos got so rich. We made them rich. The inequality that socialists complain about is the result of popular mandate. Want fewer billionaires? Stop buying their stuff.
I think this point actually made me have a brain aneurysm the first time I heard it. I just sort of had to sit there and stare at the screen for a few seconds to sort of comprehend the number of brain cells that went into writing this on the screen. Rational argument. So, we make billionaires rich, all right? Yes, this is a fact. The problem is, what do we actually do about this problem? What's the solution, right? Clearly, companies like Amazon are engaging in massively anti-competitive practices. They've been largely responsible for brick and mortar stores closing. They treat their workers like absolute garbage. They don't have breaks. They use the bathroom in cups. These are issues that pretty much everyone knows about. Most people that I've asked think Jeff Bezos is kind of a piece of shit. But people still buy from Amazon, right? And the reason for this is boycotting Amazon just won't work. Not enough people are going to be able to be convinced to do it because people highly value convenience. So a boycott of these companies just isn't feasible. It's possible, but it's not likely. A much better way to constrain the power of these corporations is through representative democracy, where we don't get enough regulations on things like workplace safety, but we do get some. And that's honestly the best way to do it. I would say expand that over just sort of crossing your fingers and hoping people are going to boycott Amazon. People don't do this. It just doesn't happen.
Free markets work not through greed or exploitation, but by satisfying our wants. And the most successful entrepreneurs are those who anticipate our wants even before we have them. No one wrote Steve Jobs asking him to make a phone that took pictures, allowed people to text messages, and listen to music. He conceived it and built it before we knew we couldn't live without it.
Again, this is true at the small scale. We want to encourage innovation. It's a good thing to reward people for innovation. The free market actually works really well for that. At a small scale, the free market works fantastically. I want to expand those benefits to work at a larger scale through reasonable government regulation. Sometimes it's a little bit bullshit, but anti-competitive business practices are something that the government fundamentally needs to be there to address, because anti-competitive business practices cause monopolies to form. And this violates, the economic theory of economic democracy.
Market economies involve a level of popular participation and democratic consent that politics can only envy. We don't need to extend democracy from the political to the economic sphere. We already have it.
Again, we have it at a small scale. We need to make it work at a larger scale. And the only feasible way to do that, rather than, again, boycotting large corporations, because this won't happen, is through our democratically elected representatives. This is important.
And the moral grounding of free markets, just like that of our political system, is in the will of the people. In the latter case, a will expressed only on election day. In the former case, a will expressed deliberately, emphatically, constantly. We don't need socialism because we already have something more moral and more democratic. It's called capitalism.
That's kind of a funny statement, but I just want to sort of reiterate, we need both of these things. We need the government and we need economic freedom. We need a free market, right? We need both of these things because they work really well together. He's arguing that the government shouldn't restrict corporations. Now, why is he arguing this? Just to sort of briefly get into it, PragerU is actually funded by fracking companies. A lot of money gets poured into this. It's not really like a public works project. They're not seeking to really educate people. PragerU is effectively trying to convince you that billionaires need to be taxed less. And the reason they're trying to do this is because billionaires want to be taxed less. It's not because it's a good idea or anything. Billionaires have interest in getting taxed less, so they fund people to tell billionaires don't need to be taxed. It's really in the interests of the people who fund this. So when you look at sources, you really just need to think, why are they saying this? Are they actually acting in the interest of the public good? Do they have an incentive to do that? Or is this just like propaganda? And in this case, I'm sorry to say, PragerU is basically just corporate propaganda. As best evidenced by videos like this that just sort of ignore a whole lot of points, conflate things, and ignore basic rules of economics. I might do more PragerU videos in the future. They sort of aggravate me to watch. It's very hard for me to get through them. It feels like, hours as I'm watching people on screen tell me, things that are just lies fed to them by billionaires. But it's probably good. A lot of people actually trust this news network. So I say news network, I mean YouTube channel. Anyway, if you like the content, please subscribe, comment, like, dislike, whatever. Engagement helps a lot. Thank you very much.